Hey everyone, and welcome to this special series of videos that I am creating for anyone who is just getting started with sketching or drawing. This first class is all about basic drawing supplies. I'm going to be explaining about the particular items that I always make sure to have in my studio nowadays, and I'm also going to be explaining all about different drawing pencil grades and how different pencil grades can come in handy throughout the drawing or sketching process. I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite sketchbook, pencil, and eraser brands, and I'm also going to be providing tips on cleaning blending stumps, sharpening pencils, and more. Make sure to stay tuned for the next classes in this series, which I'm going to be sharing over the next few weeks, because I'm going to be providing some essential exercises that will help you build a solid foundation to jump off from. All right, with all that said, let's jump in. In order to start developing your sketching skills and these essential artistic skills, such as your observational skills, your hand-eye coordination, and that strong connection between your eyes, brain, and hand and arm muscles, you don't need very much at all. When I was getting started myself at 14 years old, and even later on in my teenage years, I used what I had available back then, which in my case was simple printing paper, a pencil that I used from school, and an eraser. However, as you move on developing your drawing skills, you're probably going to become more and more frustrated because your printing paper is getting damaged very easily as you are erasing, and also perhaps the single pencil that you're using is just not allowing you to easily arrive at the effects that you're after. These are all things that you might want to eventually start collecting so that you can start building up that arsenal and take your skills and your work further. So let's jump in. In my opinion, sketchbooks are essential to have for artists because they are a place where we study, where we explore, where we improve our skills without having to work on single sheets of more expensive drawing paper. Not to mention, for some artists, their sketchbooks are their substrate of choice. They are where they work on their pieces. And when it comes to sketchbooks, there are 4 things that I would recommend looking at. The first is the thickness or the weight of the paper in your sketchbook. The second is the paper's tooth or texture level. The third thing is whether the paper in the sketchbook is acid-free or not. And the fourth thing is the size of the sketchbook. When it comes to paper thickness or weight, I like looking for sketchbooks that offer paper that is at least 60 pounds or 89 GSM in thickness or in weight. 60 pounds is already relatively thin, so if you draw pretty dark, pretty hard, or depending on the type of drawing supplies that you're using, you're probably not going to be able to use the back sides of your sheets. This sketchbook right here is one of my favorites. It has paper that is 90 pounds or 147 GSM. And it has cream colored paper. It's not a super bright white. This weight is kind of perfect in my opinion for a sketchbook. Though, as you can see, I rarely use the back sides. The back sides I use just for warming up prior to starting a new drawing or just for quicker studies. These two I also like. They have paper that is 70 pounds or 114 GSM in thickness, and this makes them kind of an in-between weight. And they're both excellent for practicing and studying and developing essential skills. All of these sketchbooks that I have shared with you today have paper that is acid-free, which means that it won't discolor over time, it won't yellow. And they also have paper that is pretty smooth. You're often going to find a smoother surface being described as light grain or fine-tooth surface, or in this one over here, it says fine texture. This means that the paper in them is pretty smooth. Now, I will say that I have a kind of sketchier, looser, more expressive kind of style. As you can see, when I shade something, the effects are not really very smooth. If you like more of a smooth look and you're going for more of a hyper-realistic finish or shading, I would go with some type of bristle paper, which is even smoother than the paper in these sketchbooks. You're going to be able to blend more smoothly on bristle paper because when you're applying graphite, that graphite is distributed evenly among that surface, as opposed to when you're working on paper that has some amount of texture or tooth to it, the graphite is not being applied as evenly. However, I would highly recommend getting yourself sketchbooks and leaving your bristle paper for longer, more time-consuming drawings. Because as I will be explaining in this mini course, if you're looking to get to that point at which you're able to sketch pretty much anything, working on those first parts of the process where you are doing your block-in and you're focusing on creating a solid preliminary sketch that shows effective proportions, shapes, perspective, and all that is essential. No amount of texture, detail, shading, or color is going to make your artwork look more realistic. And the only way to develop those skills, to create a solid foundation that you can then move on to shading or painting or whatever it is that you like to do, is to work on those first parts of the process again and again and again. And sometimes what I do is I create my preliminary outline drawing in a sketchbook, and then I use tracing paper to transfer my drawing onto my final substrate or paper that I'm going to be working on. And the final thing that I want to mention about sketchbooks is that their size is very, very important. In the next class in this mini course, I'm going to be talking about my drawing setup that I like having when I am practicing my drawing and sketching, and also holding a pencil effectively for drawing, and the importance of drawing from the shoulder and moving your entire arm. But if you're looking to practice moving your entire arm as you're drawing, it's incredibly important that you use a relatively larger sketchbook. All of these sketchbooks over here are 9 by 12 inches. This is the smallest size that I would recommend for a sketchbook for anyone who is really trying to advance their sketching or drawing skills. These are great for taking outside in trips to museums, but most of the time when you're working on something this size or smaller, which just as an FYI, this is 5.5 times 8.5 inches, you're only going to be moving your wrist and you're going to be too close to the piece, and we're trying to step away from that. These are great because they're portable, they help you stay consistent, but make sure that you're choosing your tools wisely that will help you with the specific practice that you're working on. I'm not going to be getting into tone paper in this mini course, but for those who are interested, I will be leaving a little tutorial down below in which I take you through my process for doing quick shading on tone paper. But I would recommend tone paper for people who are a little bit more advanced. For anyone who is just getting started, honestly, a set like this with just 6 different drawing pencils is more than enough. Personally, I don't use H pencils very much at all because they are too hard and too scratchy, and I usually start my drawings with an HB and then move on to softer pencil grades as I'm developing my shading. A couple of my favorite brands when it comes to drawing pencils are Faber-Castell and Derwent. This one right here is a set that I have gotten time and time again. These are graphite pencils from their 9000 series, and this set right here has an HB, a B, a 2B, 4B, 6B, and 8B. That is more than enough for me. I also really like Derwent's graphic line and their sketching line. Let's talk about drawing pencil grades now and how different pencil grades might come in handy throughout the drawing process. When you buy any kind of drawing pencil, any brand, what you're going to notice is that each pencil has this little code over here that is composed out of a number and a letter, a single letter, or 2 letters. And that little code tells you how hard or how soft the graphite in the core of that pencil is. The HB pencil is right in the middle of this range. If the code has an H, that means that the graphite in that core of that pencil is hard. And the higher and higher the number alongside that H is, the harder the graphite gets. This means that the 8H is harder than the 2H. And you can remember this because the letter H stands for hard. On the other hand, B stands for black or bold, and the B range offers softer graphite. The higher the number alongside that B, the softer that graphite is. This tells me that the 8B pencil has graphite in its core that is softer than the 2B pencil. And when it comes to the HB, that is right in the middle. If you ever come across an F pencil, F stands for fine or fine point, and it would sit right here. It's very similar to the HB. What I would recommend doing when you buy your first pencil set, play with them. See how it feels to lay down that graphite. You will feel how the harder pencil grades are scratchier, and the look of that graphite as it is being placed on paper, it looks lighter. And when you explore and start laying down graphite with your B pencils, it will feel a lot more buttery, a lot smoother as you're laying down that graphite. The softer and softer you get with your pencil grades, the smudgier that graphite is going to be, and the more easily you're going to start to get messy and graphite all over your hands because that graphite is a lot softer. Here's a quick exercise that I have my students go through. So if you take your HB pencil and start doing this, I'm not applying very much pressure at all, and I'm going to keep my pressure the same for all of these explorations that I'm going to be doing for all my pencils. So that is just one single layer of graphite created with my HB pencil, and I did not press down hard at all. I try to use the side of my tip of my pencil as I'm doing this exploration, not the tip. I'm going to move on to do the same thing with my 2B, using the exact same pressure that I used before. I'm not pressing down any harder. Now I'm going to move on to using my 4B, trying to keep my pressure exactly the same from pencil to pencil, and just doing one single layer. Now moving on to my 6B, same thing. And now my 8B, same exact thing. Can you see how the graphite looks darker and darker as I make my way down toward the 8B? Now let's try to do the same thing with the H pencils. This is the least hardest of my H pencils that I have. A lot scratchier right off the bat. Moving on to the next hardest. Moving on to the next. Trying to apply the same amount of pressure, but also notice what you're feeling as you're laying down that graphite, how much scratchier it is. And finally, moving on to the hardest pencil that I have right now, which is actually a 5H and not an 8H. Notice how that graphite looks lighter and lighter as you make your way toward the hardest pencil grade, and it looks a lot darker as you make your way toward the softest. I would also recommend doing the smudge test with your fingers so that you can see how much smudgier your softer pencil grades are than your harder pencil grades. So for example, this is an 8B pencil, and I'm going to use this finger right here, which as you can see is completely clean. And I'm just going to push and pull some graphite out. Notice how much graphite I got on my finger there. I'm going to do the same thing with the HB using this one right here. Okay, I'm able to pull and push some of that graphite out, but not quite as much as this one. And remember, this is just one layer of graphite. So imagine if I had more graphite there. You can see how I was able to get a good amount of graphite on the tip of my finger there. Not quite as much as this one, but a pretty good amount. And I'm going to use this ring finger right here to smudge the 4H. I am able to smudge some, but not as much as these two. And if we look at my finger, there is definitely not as much graphite there than these other two. So let's talk about why these are helpful when you are moving through a full sketching or drawing process, or even if you are creating a drawing that you're then moving on to painting. Maybe you are painting with watercolor over that. When you're first starting a drawing, you're likely laying down lines and shapes that you're going to be moving on to refine.
and you want to be able to erase whatever you need to erase. Using a harder pencil grade is going to allow you to do that. Because this graphite is not super soft and smudgy, it's going to be easier to erase than the lines and shapes that you create with softer pencil grades. But as I said in the beginning, I like starting my sketches with an HB because the H's are very scratchy a lot of the times. And that in and of itself can damage the paper if you're not careful. So you should still be drawing lightly and not applying very much pressure at all. With whatever pencil you're using, you shouldn't be pressing down very hard to the point that you're scratching and damaging your paper. And once you develop that skill to draw lightly, you can create very light sketches that are easily erasable with the HB. And when I'm creating a preliminary sketch that I'm going to be moving on to paint with watercolor, I just use the HB and that's it. I make sure to keep my drawing nice and light so that the graphite isn't visible through my paint at the end. But when I am working on a drawing that I'm going to be creating any amount of shading in, I start with my HB. And then once my preliminary outline drawing looks good, I move on to my 2B and then maybe a 6B, getting softer and softer with that graphite as I make my way through the drawing process. And if I am pushing for higher levels of realism, like with this apple drawing right here, I usually use 3 or 4 pencils, but I do a lot of layering and I take more time with smoother blending and that kind of thing. You can create high levels of realism with 3 to 4 pencil grades. And I also want to say that once you become very skilled at pressure control and fine motor skills, you can definitely create very high levels of realism with one single drawing pencil, with one single grade. Having a variety of drawing pencil grades throughout your drawing process is simply a way to be able to control more so that you're able to develop that wider range of values throughout your drawing, lights, midtones, and darks, without feeling the need of pressing down too hard on your paper to develop those darkest values. Using softer pencil grades is going to allow you to develop those darkest darks without feeling the need to press down super hard, which, as I said, can damage your paper and you're not going to be able to fix that. Burnishing is a valid technique that a lot of artists use, which essentially is when you press down your pencil or drawing tool hard on your paper, which completely flattens out all of that tooth. However, you should know that once your paper is burnished, it's not going to take on that graphite, that material, the same way. Those kinds of techniques should be left for the later or final stages of the drawing process. And the last thing that I want to say in regards to graphite pencils is that you're only going to get so dark, even with your softest pencil grades. Graphite pencils are going to allow you to create a very nice wide range of gray values, from super, super light gray to very, very dark gray. And so in the future, if you want to bring in a tool that will help you create black, very, very dark values and higher levels of contrast, you could go with something like these pencils from Staedtler. These are Mars Lumograph black pencils. And the difference between these pencils and these pencils is that these black Lumograph pencils have carbon mixed with the graphite, and that carbon is going to allow you to create blacks, whereas simple graphite will not. Something else that you can consider using for those darkest values at the end of the drawing process is perhaps a black colored pencil or a black pastel. When it comes to sharpening your pencils, honestly, if you're just getting started, all you need is this. This is a simple metallic sharpener and it works just great. If you are a little bit more advanced, you can consider using an X-Acto knife or something like this, a crafting knife. I would not recommend using a knife to sharpen your pencils if you have shaky hands or if you just lack confidence using knives. But for those of you who would like to learn how to sharpen a drawing pencil with a knife, here is how you do it. I'm gonna sharpen the tip of this broken pencil. You hold your pencil with your non-dominant hand. I am right-handed, so I have my knife in my right hand. And essentially what you do is you're gonna use the thumb of your non-dominant hand to push down the blade. And how much you leave exposed is entirely up to you. Some artists like leaving a lot of the tip exposed, others not as much. Notice how I am pushing down the blade with my left thumb. And you could just get it to whatever you like. Please be careful if you're doing this. So as you can see, I've left quite a bit of that graphite exposed there. You don't have to leave as much. Put this away. And if you want to make your tip super sharp and pointy, I would recommend using sandpaper. A little sanding pad is often included in many drawing kits, so you can use that. This is just some sandpaper that I had at home. Don't press down too hard because you don't want to break that tip off. But you can see how I'm able to get it nice and pointy, and you can spend more time doing this until you get that tip to your liking. In my studio, I like having 3 different types of erasers, and I kind of use them for different things depending on what I am doing and the effects that I'm going for. To begin, there is this general purpose soft graphite eraser, and there are many kinds. There are vinyl erasers, there are sand erasers, there are rubber erasers, and gum erasers. I usually like gum erasers because they are the softest, and because I paint with watercolor and I need to keep that watercolor paper safe as I am creating my preliminary sketch. Though some people might find soft gum erasers annoying because certain parts break off, for me, they are awesome to have on hand because they won't damage my watercolor paper. And I not only use them when I am going to be painting with watercolor, I use them when I need to correct larger portions of my drawing. I really like generals when it comes to erasers. This would be considered a gum eraser, which is the softest kind of eraser, and these are soft rubber erasers, which are also great. The second type of eraser that I make sure to have in my studio are kneadable or kneaded erasers. Kneadable erasers kind of serve a few different functions, but they look like chewed up bubble gum, and you can manipulate them to take whatever shape you want so that you can go into small areas and erase that graphite up. But something that I like doing is just tapping my kneaded eraser over a certain section of graphite to lighten that graphite. Like for example here, just going like this, you can see how much graphite I've collected by just tapping, pressing lightly over that graphite. You can lift up some of that graphite whenever you need to clean up your drawing or lighten up areas. When I am preparing a sketch that I'll be painting with watercolor, I always like making sure that it is light before jumping into the painting process. And having a kneadable eraser on hand is helpful because when I'm done with my sketch, I can just go into any areas that I'm looking to soften and tap over that and lighten. And then the last eraser that I have in my studio is the Mono Zero eraser. And this is a type of eraser that I use when I am going to be developing higher levels of realism in drawings, like with that one apple that I shared with you before, which I have a full tutorial on Patreon. And this eraser is cool because you can go in areas and erase graphite up in a very controlled way. You're going to be able to clean up things with more defined shapes than you can with a kneaded eraser. Even if you do give form to that kneaded eraser and you make it very small and pointy, this is still soft, so you can only press down so hard before it starts to distort. Not to mention, when you're drawing something like hair, adding those wisps of hair at the end as little highlights can really take the realism of your drawing up to another level. I really like this Mr. Pen brand for kneaded erasers. I got this huge box for a great price via Amazon a couple of years ago, and I still have a few left. And the last item that I would recommend investing in are 1 or 2 blending stumps. I will say that I only use blending stumps when I am pushing for higher levels of realism. In many of my sketches, I never bring in blending stumps because, as I said before, I usually like a sketchier, more raw look to my drawings. Sometimes I find it easier to just go in with a regular kitchen paper towel, wrap it around my hand, and do my blending with that. Learning how to use blending stumps is a skill in and of itself. As you're using them, graphite starts getting collected in the tip there. And especially if the graphite that is there on the tip is a softer graphite, you can start darkening areas that you weren't intending to darken, and your drawing can become muddy and messy. You want to use them lightly over your graphite. You're not pressing down too hard. And you want to pay attention to how much graphite is getting collected there on the tip. And if you're asking yourself, well, how can I clean that graphite off that tip so that I can continue using it? One of the things that I would recommend doing before jumping into anything more aggressive is rubbing that tip on your kneadable eraser. Plenty of that graphite is going to stay there. Just roll it on there. Or you can also do this. And that will help remove that graphite as well. You can continue with your drawing process and you may find that that is enough. But if you find that it is very dirty, you might need to go to your sandpaper and sand that tip down. All blending stumps are is just a tightly wound or rolled up piece of paper. And by sanding that down, you're going to get rid of that dirty paper and expose the clean paper underneath. And as you can see, the point is clean now. All right, everyone, so that is going to do it for this first class. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Collect your drawing supplies and make sure that you do your explorations with your different drawing pencil grades, and I'll meet you in class number 2.